You are a young mother in the year 1453 within the walls of Constantinople, as the city that has stood for more than 1,000 years shakes under the pounding of Ottoman cannons. The great walls that once seemed unbreakable now crumble stone by stone, and the thunder of bombardment does not stop day or night. 3 days ago, your husband fell while defending the ramparts, and you buried him in haste with tears that had no time to dry. Now, as the dawn rises with the smell of smoke and fear, you clutch your infant daughter while soldiers beat against your door. You already know that the fate awaiting you and your child will make your husband's death seem like mercy. For 6 centuries, the empire of the Ottomans spread across 3 continents, and their banners reached from the gates of Vienna in the west to the deserts of Arabia in the south. People today recall their mosques, their palaces, and their cunning generals. They remember the beauty of the Blue Mosque and the stories of sultans who shaped the destiny of lands stretching from the Balkans to Mesopotamia. Yet beneath this memory lies a truth long hidden in archives and whispered in chronicles, a truth about conquest, not of battlefield glory, but of systematic domination over the most intimate aspects of human life. When an Ottoman army stormed a city, the moment of victory marked not the end of battle, but the beginning of a cold process. This was not the chaos of wild soldiers or the frenzy of looting. It was planned in advance, calculated by officials, and executed with a precision that rivaled any bureaucracy of the age. When Constantinople finally fell on May 29th, the year 1453, the soldiers of Sultan Mehmed did not simply plunder and withdraw. They enacted a procedure described in their manuals as the harvest. The term may sound agricultural, but its meaning was the reduction of human beings into resources for the empire. Chroniclers of Byzantium describe scenes that appear to come from nightmares. Families driven into public squares, their fates decided by cold assessments, while flames devoured churches and the air filled with cries of despair. Ottoman records, however, present these same events not as chaos but as standard administration. They list categories, numbers, values, and destinations with the same attention to detail one would expect from merchants tallying wares. The first victims were men and boys. Adult males over 12 were executed in groups after surrender, not in battle, but afterward in organized fashion. The aim was not simply to kill soldiers, but to eliminate the potential for resistance even in the form of future generations. Boys as young as 6 who showed defiance or strength were also killed. Death was chosen for the males, while women and girls were subjected to something even more terrible. Women were sorted into categories. The sorting took place in public squares in front of burning homes and shattered temples so that all could see and feel the crushing weight of helplessness. The most valued were young women between 14 and 25. Records from Constantinople list over 4,200 women in this group, each assigned a number and a market value as though they were livestock. The second group were women between 25 and 40, deemed suitable for labor but less valuable for other uses. The third were women over 40 who were executed immediately, considered a burden unworthy of transport or food. Children had their own grim paths. Boys under 6 were often taken into the Devshirme system, where they were trained, converted, and molded into servants or soldiers of the empire. Girls under 12 were sent into what were called formation programs, designed to prepare them for roles within the imperial hierarchy. In these programs, identity and childhood were stripped away, replaced by obedience and fear. The cruelty was not only physical, but psychological. Families were forced to watch the separations. Mothers saw daughters pulled from their arms and knew they would never meet again. Infants were sometimes killed before their mother's eyes, not out of necessity, but as a calculated weapon to break the spirit. By demonstrating complete power over life and death, the conquerors ensured that resistance would seem impossible. Within 2 days of Constantinople's fall, about 50,000 people were processed in this way. 12,000 women and girls were shipped to cities across the empire. Another 8,000 were given to soldiers as rewards for service.
The empire kept meticulous records of all of this because it was not seen as an atrocity, but as an economic activity.
Ships carried silks, spices, metals, and alongside them human cargo. A manifest might list 20 bolts of silk, 40 jars of pepper, and 15 females aged 16 to 20 excellent condition. These women were stripped not only of freedom, but of their very names. In the ledgers, they were described only by age, appearance, and price. Markets in Bursa or Istanbul displayed them in rows, and prices shifted with demand. A Greek woman might sell for 20 pieces of silver, while others fetched more or less depending on the judgment of merchants. The system was industrial in scale and chilling in its efficiency. Bills of sale, receipts, and contracts. still rest in archives testifying to the transformation of human lives into property. Success in war was not only about land or fortresses, but about the number and quality of captives. Commanders gained rewards based on how many people they delivered. This gave incentive to target civilians, not only enemy armies. Fear of this system became one of the empire's most effective weapons. Cities often surrendered without a fight rather than face what they knew awaited their women and children. The journey for those taken was its own torment. Ships designed for carrying people in chains had ventilation and water storage to keep the captives alive just long enough to reach markets. Mortality rates averaged 15%, which administrators considered acceptable. Those who died were cast into the sea, and their deaths noted as if they were spoiled grain or broken cargo. What followed was legal transformation. In Ottoman law, rape became marriage and slavery became divine right. A concept called war wife gave a conqueror ownership over the widow of any man he killed. The procedure was formal and witnessed, and disputes over women were handled in courts like property cases. Names were stripped and replaced with Turkish names. Forced conversion followed, where women were made to denounce their old faith in public rituals. Some were forced to spit on icons or burn sacred texts. Conversion centers existed in cities where thousands of women were processed through programs of indoctrination lasting months. Archaeological traces in places like Bursa show buildings designed with chambers and restraints to hold women during these ordeals. The programs ensured not only obedience but also pregnancy through systematic abuse. Children born of these unions were often taken away and raised as loyal subjects, never knowing their mother's real identity. The empire used terror as propaganda. Stories of what happened to women were deliberately spread into territories yet to be conquered. The fear of systematic violation made villages surrender quickly, hoping to avoid the fate of Constantinople. Yet surrender rarely spared them. Even voluntary submission often resulted in women being taken under the same system. Tribute levies also claimed girls as well as boys. While boys might be trained for administration or military service, girls vanished into networks of sexual exploitation and forced breeding. Records show that many of these girls perished within the first year of captivity. Those who survived were managed like livestock with calculations of pregnancy rates and lifespan. Documents show chilling attention to detail. Administrators debated the best age for capture, the best methods to destroy hope, and the balance between exploitation and survival. Women were given numbers and tracked in registers that logged pregnancies and births. Buildings were designed with small cells, corridors for surveillance, and courtyards for controlled exercise. Medical staff cared not for the women's well-being, but to ensure the continuation of pregnancies and the preservation of imperial investments. Older women who failed to produce. Children were transferred to labor camps where conditions were brutal and life expectancy short. Psychological tactics were constant. Women were told their families were dead and villages destroyed so that hope would vanish. Without hope, escape seemed pointless. Mothers were separated from children at the age of 5 or 6, creating emotional devastation that increased dependence on captors. Children themselves were shaped by the system. Boys with strength were taken for military service, while girls were judged for their potential as future breeding stock. Generations grew up with no memory of their true heritage. The empire had engineered a society where family ties were severed, ensuring loyalty only to the Ottoman system. This practice was not an occasional crime of war. It was the policy of an empire that lasted centuries. It shaped the lives of millions and scarred cultures across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Communities lived in terror of seasonal raids where Ottoman scouts mapped villages and identified women for capture. Families went to desperate lengths. Some scarred their daughters' faces or crippled them to make them less appealing. Others built underground chambers or forest hideouts. Yet raiders adapted with torture and violence until even these defenses failed. The trauma of this history outlasted the empire itself. Societies changed their customs and traditions to protect women from capture. Songs, stories, and rituals carried memories of fear.